You are listening to the Spiritual Warrior Coach with Barbara Savin, the podcast for discovering how powerful your wisdom, compassion, and courage is. Get ready to join Barbara and her guests as they explore and offer you advice on how to reclaim your power, your energy, and your authentic self. And now, here's the host of the show, Barbara Savin.
Well, thank you for joining me today, and welcome to the Spiritual Warrior Coach podcast. I am your host, Barbara Savin, and I am here to help you reclaim your power, your energy, and your authentic self. You know, I am a certified clinical and medical hypnotherapist, Reiki master and teacher, energy healing specialist, life coach, and best-selling author of Gentle Energy Touch, The Beginner's Guide to Hands-on Healing. You know, I have been helping my clients for over 35 years, and the older I get, the more wisdom seems to come through. So isn't it time that you believe in yourself? You know, your mind is going to provide you with your greatest challenges in life because it's so very, very powerful. So let's use it for positive thinking, creating harmony, balance, peace, love, happiness, and anything else that your heart desires. Because one day the world will tap you on your shoulder and say, this is your time to shine. And speaking about shining, I'm going to bring my guest on right now. Hello, Bob. How are you?
I'm good, Barbara. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And before we begin our interview, I want to let my listeners know about you. Bob Ginsberg started researching the evidence for survival of consciousness soon after his daughter passed away in 2002. Devastated by, of course, her loss, he needed science to tell him if she still existed in some form. And then in 2004, Bob and his wife, Phran, founded Forever Family Foundation, which is a global not-for-profit that educates the public about evidence that we are more than our physical bodies. And Bob hosts the Signs of Life radio show, is a past editor of Signs of Life magazine, heads the foundation's Medium Evaluation Certification Program, writes a blog at beyondthefivesenses.com, and is the author of The Medium Explosion. And Bob and Phran and the foundation are currently featured in the Netflix Surviving Death series. And sadly, Phran, his wife, passed away in September 22 of 2020. And, you know, I am so sorry for all your losses. Well, losing your daughter and then your wife, that's, I cannot fathom at all. I mean, the experiences of that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, it's, you know, it makes you be very much aware that, you know, every day's a gift, you know, and life changes in the blink of an eye, and you have to, there's nothing to do but accept it, you know. You live for today, and you have no choice. You just keep going.
Keep going. Yeah, it's a loss of wife or child or anyone so dear to us is devastating. I just lost my uncle a few weeks ago, and that was devastating for me. So yeah, this is it's a tough situation, but yeah, we have to get up in the morning, be grateful that our eyes are open, and move forward the best we can. So
yeah, absolutely, and I agree with that. And you know, very often when you suffer some sort of a trauma, whether that be a loss of somebody or any physical or mental trauma, very often that is a trigger for exploration as we seek meaning and purpose, and that could come in the form of the work that you do, you know, with energy healing or philosophy or science, but you begin to think of things that you never contemplated before. I know that certainly was true in my case.
Right. So I would assume that actually prompted you in learning more about survival of consciousness.
Yeah, I mean, if we were having this conversation 20 years ago, and somebody mentioned to me, surviving death, I would have looked at them like they're a little off their rocker. I mean,
Mhm.
to me, believing in life after death was like believing in Santa Claus. It's a nice fantasy, but no basis in reality. And then, I mean, I had personal evidence. I mean, my wife my son and daughter were in a car accident, and at 3 o'clock in the morning on that day, my wife woke up she was shaking in bed. She was sitting up in bed, and I said, "What's the matter?" And she said, "Something horrible is going to happen today." And I said, "What does that mean?" And she said, "Something devastating, utterly devastating is going to happen today." And I took her seriously. Why did I take her seriously? Because many times in our lives together, she had these visions or intuitive feelings, and every time she had one, it turned out to play out exactly the way she said it would. So then logic told me, even though I really didn't sort of believe in, mind over matter and intuition and so forth, it told me if she was right then, she could be right now. And, to make a long story short, I watched over my 3 children throughout the day. That's what any parent would do when you have a warning like that. And I let my guard down at night, and it faded from my awareness. And that's when the accident happened. But after I emerged from a month-long state of shock, because my son was also seriously injured, and he was in a coma, and we didn't know if we were going to lose him too. It suddenly hit me. I remembered that morning. I said, "Wait a second. How did Phran know? How did my wife know?" Because she knew. She was trembling. She was ashen white. She knew. And that started my personal journey in meeting with scientists and researchers and medical doctors across the United States that studied consciousness and the power of the mind and so forth. And I eventually, I was amazed by the body of evidence that there was. I was like, I looked at it, I said, how could everybody not know about this? It was mind-boggling to me. And one thing led to another, and we started this foundation, Forever Family Foundation, in 2004. And now just shows you the interest in these things. We have 12,000 members across the globe, and there are a lot of people that not only have suffered the loss of a loved one, but they're starting to contemplate their own mortality. We live in this age of the pandemic, and people around us, are no longer here. And so I think that especially those of us who are aging start to think about that possibility.
Oh, I know. I've always known it's been real, because my grandma was a healer. And myself as a child, I was able to see spirit, speak to spirit, feel them. And what made it truly real for me was when my grandma died at 18, when I was 18 years old. Because 2 weeks before her death, I actually dreamed how she died and saw everything about the funeral. And when I woke up, of course, I prayed to God, I said, please don't let that happen. It was just a bad dream. But then 2 weeks later, my dream actually became reality. So I was actually seeing ahead of time. And everything that transpired that day was exactly what my dream was. And it's scary sometimes.
Yeah, and many of us, I would say all of us, have some degree of intuitive ability. There are some people that have enhanced abilities, such as yourself, mediums that practice spirit communication. But the thing is that we all have the power to connect, either, among the living or those who are no longer living, if we're able to get into that zone and quiet our minds and get into that altered state of consciousness. And a lot of our work involves, mediums, and people, I think, sometimes become too reliant on, the medium communication, and they stop the possibility of having their own, personal communication. A number of years back, I did a survey, and I asked our membership, one of the questions on the survey was, if you had the choice would you want to communicate with your deceased loved one directly or through the services of a medium? And I thought the majority was going to say, directly, because that's the way I felt, but it was the opposite. And the majority said through a medium. And the reason people said that when I started to probe further was that one, people were fearful of things that they can't see, the fear of the unknown. So that factored into one of the reasons why they would rather have it through a third party. And the other part is the people said that if I get it in my own, the communication on my own, I'm going to question myself. Is it my imagination? Am I making it up? Whereas if they got it through a professional, a medium, then they could trust the information more. So I understood the reasons for it. I was just surprised by it.
Oh, yeah, because I always tell everyone, just trust your intuitive abilities because it's always there for you. And the more we meditate, the more we become enlightened, the more our vibration rises, we can then feel and see these things. I mean, some of my clients get afraid when I mention to them, we're actually walking amongst the other people that we don't see. If your vibration is very high, you would see that. I was in the car with my granddaughter a few days ago, and she's 19, she'll be 19. And she's very intuitive and psychic. And all of a sudden she said to me, Grandma, did you just see that? And I said, see what? She's, oh, I saw that lady walk right through the bus. Well, of course, she's seeing at a different vibration. And I looked at her and I smiled. I said, well, I didn't see it, but I know it's there. But yeah, I guess people, they're actually afraid of this.
Yeah, I'm always reminded one time at one of our grief retreats, I was having a conversation with one of the attendees and I said, what would it take, for you to 100% believe and know, that your daughter still exists, her deceased daughter. And she said, if I saw my daughter, if I visually saw her, then I would be absolutely convinced. And that made sense. And then about maybe 4 or 5 years later, I happened to see the same person again. And she grabbed me on the side. She said, Bob, he said, I saw my daughter. And I said, really? What happened? I woke up and I saw her sitting on the side of my bed. I said, and then what happened? She said, well, then I got so scared that I let out a scream and then my daughter was gone. And,
Yeah.
I tell that as an example because here we are, we want desperately to be able to communicate with our loved ones. And then here, this woman's daughter was able to manifest in physical form to visit her mom.
Yeah.
And what a shame that the fear took over instead of embracing it, and having a conversation or being together. So, and fear is instilled upon us, maybe by our families or maybe by the movies or media, and our educators, because they keep telling us that, you only believe in what you can see and perceive with your physical senses. So that fear perception just takes hold and it's paralyzing to a certain degree.
Oh, without a doubt, when my mom died, the night before she passed away, she had me do healing on her, which she never did. But for some reason, I guess she wanted it. And so I had said to her, can't do healing on you, can't help you get better physically, but you'll feel peace and calm and know that you'll be just fine when you go home to the other side. And then I had mentioned to my sister, mommy's going to pass away probably the next day. And of course, my sister was in complete denial. But the next morning, because my mom died in the house with us, and my sister got deathly ill. She was very sick. And then when I was sitting with my mom, all of a sudden I had the feeling like I couldn't breathe. And so I stepped out of the room for just one moment, and that's when she passed away. And then, of course, my sister came running in and stuff, and she kept on telling me, I don't think mommy went to the light. I don't think mommy went to the light. And I said to her, Janet, I says, Grandma was here. And I told her everyone who was in the room, because I could see them. I said, believe me, she's hovering around to make sure we're fine, but she will go to the light. Well, long story short, that night, at my sister and I, we needed to do planning and stuff. So we were up till like 2 o'clock in the morning, and then we finally went to sleep, and I was in her home. So I slept upstairs, and her husband slept downstairs. And all of a sudden I hear them screaming downstairs. I go running downstairs. What's the matter? What happened? Now, mind you, he doesn't believe in any of this. And my sister does, to an extent. All of a sudden, she said to me, Mommy and Grandma were here in the room, and they saw all this bright light, and then they both went straight up, through the ceiling. And I looked at her and I said, because you didn't believe, I said, she needed to show you she was just fine. And then from that moment forward, he believed, her husband, because he was shaking to no end, because he actually saw a spirit. And then from that point on, she believed. So, yeah. And then I went upstairs after like an hour of finally calming them down. All of a sudden, now, mind you, my door was completely closed in the bedroom. The door all of a sudden opens, and here comes these orbs all coming into the room one by one. And I knew exactly who they were. It was my mother, my grandmother, it was everybody. And there was 12 of them, to be exact. And they all started like coming into each other, and they formed one huge light and went right through the ceiling.
Yeah.
And I said, thank you, God. That was an experience that was unbelievable. So,
Well, yeah, these end of life experiences, excuse my cat.
oh no, it's okay.
It's just a tail walking back and forth. She has to be the center of attention.
Well, they all do.
Yeah, these end of life experiences are extraordinary, and talk to as we've done over the years, the medical doctors that run hospice, and they will tell you that the majority of people have these, they call them either end of life experiences or deathbed visions, that they have an escort to the other side. I mean, I've experienced it with people in my life, that have passed away. And it's a comforting thought, because nobody truly dies alone. I mean, we have our loved ones, that take us to the other side. I recall when my mother was, it was about a week before she passed away, and we were all sitting, she was sitting in a recliner chair at home, and the rest of the family was sitting in a semicircle in chairs in front of the recliner, and there was one empty chair. And all of a sudden, my mother looks, at the empty chair, and she starts talking to her deceased mom. Mom. And, of course, everybody else in the room didn't know what was going on, but my wife and I did, because this is our world. And then my father walks into the room. He was in the kitchen, and he sees the empty chair, and he goes and he sits down in the empty chair. My mother, as sick as she was, goes, get up. And she starts going nuts. My father had no idea that he sat on his mother-in-law, and he was bewildered. He got up and, what? But, it happens all the time. And my wife, when she passed away, she was talking with her deceased aunt who helped raise her, and she was very, very fond of. And I have a million accounts like that. But I think that there's no real medical explanation for it. So I think the only explanation is a spiritual one, that we all have help when it's our time to cross.
Oh, without a doubt. I truly, there's no doubt in my mind that it exists. There's no doubt.
And as you mentioned, I mean, that's also a very common thing where, where the theory is that our soul or our consciousness, releases from the physical body, and our consciousness or soul or mind, or whatever you want to call it, is made up of energy, and that energy can be detected. So people, as you experience, sometimes they'll see a white light. Some people actually describe seeing a silver cord, which supposedly would attach the soul to the physical body, snap and release. I know when my mother-in-law passed, we were in a hospital, and she had she was way, past the point of treatment, but in the room was one of those poles with a triangular thing where they used to hang the IV, bags. But it was about 3 or 4 feet from her bed. And at the moment she passed, my wife and I looked up, and that triangle, the big heavy metal triangle, was just, moving back and forth and back and forth. So I just interpreted that was her energy, leaving. So
Mhm.
it is, it's kind of a sacred experience when you witness something like that.
It truly is. And I know, like, with my mom passing, excuse me, she actually did not want me to be there for her last breath. That's why all of a sudden I felt like I couldn't breathe. The moment I stepped out of the room, that happened. So
Yeah.
it's not real. It truly is real. There's
Yeah.
I have some friends that are mediums, and they do speak to the deceased ones. And I know some of my friends actually say to me sometimes, well, maybe they're not really speaking to that one that passed over. Maybe they're just reading our minds so that they want us to believe that they're speaking to that. But I really feel a good medium, they have the capability of speaking to that loved ones.
Yeah, well, you brought up an interesting, topic, because that is one of the common arguments about, mediumship, that the mediums are not really talking to the dead, that they're picking up information telepathically, from the living. There's a theory that people call super psi, and that is that, we're surrounded by a vast storehouse of information. And they say that the mediums are picking out this information from, people may call it the Akashic records, physicists might call it a 0 point field. And you know what, when I think about it, it's one thing to imagine a medium picking out this piece of information from this vast, storehouse. But how do you extract, and that's extracting a piece of data, but how do you extract the personality? How do you explain when the medium starts taking on the personality or the
Right.
mannerisms, of the person, in spirit? So that makes me think that that's not the explanation. Also, we know very often when a medium is conducting a reading, the sitter, the person getting the reading, has no knowledge about the information that's being presented. And they only later find, when they ask somebody or investigate, they find out that it's true. So that tends to dismiss the argument that the medium is reading their mind, because you didn't know about it, till afterwards. So I think that when you look at, the research as a whole, I mean, scientists studying mediumship using the proxy sitters and blinded protocol. So nobody has any information about any of the parties involved, and mediumship still takes place. So I think it's real. I think science has been studying mediumship now for the better part of a century, and most have come to the conclusion that it's real. They can't tell you the mechanism by which it works. I mean, we think that mediumship is mind-to-mind communication. It's just that one of the parties involved, the person in spirit, doesn't have a body anymore, but they still have a mind. So it's not much different than you reading my mind, and mind-to-mind communication among the living. So it's interesting.
It's very interesting. What do you think are some maybe examples of death communications? How do you feel that they communicate with us?
Well, one way that the most common type of after-death communication is a dream visitation. When you're in that REM stage of sleep, your chatter mind is set aside, and the spirit form entity sees a conduit by which they can get through. They're not blocked. And you have these dream visitations where you can see your deceased loved one. Sometimes you could talk to your loved one, you could smell them, you could hug them, you could kiss them, and so forth. Very different from a scattered regular dream. And these dream visitations, stay with us. Since people are energy in the spirit world, they can manifest different things by manipulating energy. If you watch the Netflix series, we gave Netflix a film, a clip that my wife had shot. We were talking about my deceased daughter, and then we walked into our kitchen that had like 9 hi-hats in the ceiling. And all of a sudden we were treated to like a 4th of July light show. I mean, the hi-hats were just, just going on and off and flashing and in different patterns, which lasted about 5 minutes, and then it stopped. And then I walked away and my wife called me, and then it started up again. So, it was kind of extraordinary, but I always think of a physical explanation first. So the very next, at 9 o'clock the next morning, I had an electrician in the house. I made him take down each one of the 9 hi-hats, and I made him take off all the light switches. So there was absolutely nothing wrong. It had never happened in the 10 years that we had been living in the house, and it never happened for the years afterwards. So that, to me, I would accept as a form of an after-death communication. We're talking about my daughter, and now she's saying hello. So, manipulations of energy is another way. You mentioned, orbs. Sometimes people see that. Signs, synchronicities, all sorts of occurrences that defy, physical thinking, but they happen, nonetheless. Some people it's very subtle. They just feel a sense of presence. They're in a room and they say, you know what? Mom is here. I can't tell you how I know, but mom is here. Or sometimes they'll smell dad's cigar smoke, and there's no reason for it, but it just happens. So people love to talk about the signs that they get in the after-death communications, and it's, even though it's so-called anecdotal evidence, it's been happening, since the dawn of man. So that is a form of evidence.
Now, I think this was about 25 years ago. I actually had a near-death experience. I was working a lot of hours, taking care of the kids, everything. And in my sleep, I believe I actually died. And as I'm walking through this unbelievably calm, peaceful tunnel of light, there I see my relatives and my dog that had passed away, and everybody's like greeting me. And then at the end of the tunnel was my grandma Jenny, and she looked at me and she was smiling. And this is the one that had passed away when I was 18. And as I went to reach for her hand, I said, "Grandma, is that you? Is that you?" And you'd call me Babacita, and she said, "Yes, Babacita, it is." And then all of a sudden, as we almost touched one another, she looks at me and she said, "No, no." And she pushed me like that. And I went all the way back out the tunnel, woke up gasping for air. And my husband said, "What happened? What's the matter?" And I was, number one, I was ice cold. And I said to him, "I think I just died, and my grandma pushed me back." And it was, I can't even explain the feeling. And of course, I went to the doctor the next day to make sure, am I okay or what, and he couldn't find anything wrong with me. So yeah. I think it was just for me to experience something like that. And when she pushed me back, it was a crazy feeling. I can't even explain it.
Yeah. Well, you've experienced, I mean, we work with medical doctors that have been studying near-death experiences for decades. And you right there had 3 classic experiences. One, you saw deceased relatives. 2, you were really told that it was not your time and you were sent, back. And 3, you experienced what a lot of people describe as a tunnel, with light at the end. And, there are about, not every near-death experience, experiences the same thing, but there are about 10 or 12 classic things that, are common to a lot of them. And I think it's tremendous evidence of life after death. I mean, people who meet it may not have been the same in your particular case regarding physical death, but in a lot of cases, especially in the surgical arena in a hospital, people meet every definition of death that medical science has. They have no heartbeat, they have no respiration, they have no brain waves, they have no reflexes, they're dead. And yet, they describe leaving their body, being able to look at their body, even as the doctors, working on them, and then eventually, because of our resuscitative techniques today, are able to get, brought, back to life, and then they can try. It's very hard to put into words what they experience, and incidentally, a tremendously high percentage of near-death experiences, when they come back, they have heightened intuitive abilities. Some usually they didn't have any before, and now they're
Right.
tremendously psychic and things of that nature. But also for a lot of people, once they come back, it's difficult to reassimilate into the physical world, because they were in this world of beauty where they had no pain, and now they're and also they had this greater knowledge, and now they're back and very often in pain again, and have to deal with our physical world. So I think that may be the most extraordinary part of that the experiences have to tell us, that there is a different place, and it's quite different than this physical realm.
It's very I have to say, it was the most peaceful feeling I had ever experienced. Peaceful and loving I've ever experienced.
Yeah.
It was, of course I thanked them, because I actually knew then what happened. And I said, all right, we don't want this to happen again, because I want to make sure I come back. So, but yeah, it is a different, and it is very hard to explain. And some people feel, well, it's just, maybe your imagination, or maybe, something in your body heightened, some chemical in your body heightened. But I don't feel that that's the case. I really feel some of us have experienced this.
Yeah, and a lot of people, they try to argue against it by saying it's oxygen deprivation,
Right.
like hallucinating. But if you've ever experienced, come across somebody that's suffering from hypoxia with a lack of oxygen, like a fighter pilot, it's anything but clear and lucid thinking. They're thrashing about, they're disjointed, it's very fragmented. Here, near-death experiences talk about clear, lucid, logical thinking.
Yes.
And that they're thinking clearer than they ever did in their lives. So how would one explain that when your brain is not working? That shows you that your physical brain is not the same as your mind. Your mind can act independently of your physical brain.
The physical brain, yeah. It was unbelievable. And I truly believe we walk amongst the dead. It's just, if our vibration was higher, we'd be able to speak to everybody.
Yeah, and some people are able to raise their vibrations and their frequency and reach that at the same time that discarnates, people in the other realm, are able to lower their frequency, and some sort of a match occurs. But it's funny when we always talk about our loved ones, like we'll look up in the sky and,
Yes.
but if they're in another dimension, another plane of existence, they could be right in front of our nose, like right next to us, just, we can't perceive it unless we could pierce that veil. But, it's, we don't know how many dimensions they are. We assume that there's also a natural progression, of growth and learning on the other side. So initially, you may congregate with other like-minded people, and then gradually, kind of elevate to other spheres of existence.
It's amazing. I feel it's amazing. And without a doubt, I know there is life after death. Do you feel, this is maybe a little far-fetched question, that we've come back more lifetimes, that we've lived other lifetimes?
Yeah, I mean, that may be the most controversial part of all the evidence for life after death. Now, Ian Stevenson, who was a researcher at the University of Virginia, studied past life memories of children for more than 40 years. And now Dr. Jim Tucker is a medical doctor at the same university, continues his research. And, there are these extraordinary cases of they identify children who start talking about a past life. And then the investigator, the researcher becomes an investigator, like a detective, and he'll go and he'll pull medical records, he'll pull all sorts of court records. And sometimes if the child is able to identify the other family and the location, they'll take them to visit the other family. And there's a lot of extraordinary evidence. So the question would be, do we all reincarnate? My personal opinion is that it's a choice, that we have free will here, we have free will there. It's a hard concept to think of in physical terms, but like you say, why would somebody choose to come back and live a life of hardship or poverty? And on a soul level, possibly to complete their soul, it's recognized that component is still needed to complete them. So they go and do it. Now, we think that physical life isn't, seems slow and it's like goes by like it's an eternity, but in a big continuum of life, it's like a blip, a little tiny blip, So to us, like, how could you endure it? But if you're looking at it from a different point of view, then you can understand it. It's one of the things when I look at all the evidence and I look at near-death experiences and mediumship and after-death communications and end-of-life experiences and even electronic voice phenomena, it's the most difficult. I think many people, especially most spiritual people, believe in some form of reincarnation, more so in other countries, than here. But it does, seem to make sense that we have lived otherwise. Now, sometimes the researchers tell us that the time between lives is somewhere between the average of 5 and 6 years. It's not decades. Like wow. You'll come back 5 or 6 years after you've gone. I don't know. And then you also assume that there's what goes on in the between lives. Life. Between life until you decide to come back. People say that you actually choose your mother, your parents, come back. So it's so hard for us to think of things like that, but yet there's a lot of evidence that says, yeah, we do come back.
Yeah, I think we do. I keep on saying I don't want to come back anymore.
Yeah, I say the same thing. I had enough.
I said, I think I'm done now, because I know I was a healer in other lives, and I was actually killed because I've seen me in my dreams. And I feel this lifetime, I was actually not afraid now to come out and say who I was. So, but yeah, I keep on saying, I think I'm done.
Yeah.
No more, please. But
well, reincarnation would also explain certain phobias that people have, like
yeah,
they're deathly afraid of the water, and then you find out, well, maybe they drowned in a past life and so forth, so, or fire, things of that nature. So, there's also cases famous in reincarnation research, birthmark cases where the child, let's say, is born with, with what look like bullet holes or burn marks in certain areas of their body, and these birthmarks. And then when they pull the medical records of the person that they claim that they once were, they find out that person was shot and was murdered, and the birthmarks on their body corresponds with the wounds on the previous person. That's hard to explain.
Yeah, I'd say,
Yeah.
it's very hard. This was about 3 years ago. A mom brought her son to me. He was 12 years old. He kept on complaining about his shoulder was hurting, and she took him to all these doctors. They found nothing wrong. And then someone suggested taking him to me. And when we sat down, he said to me, I know what's wrong. I said, don't tell me what's wrong. Let me do, my session with you, and then we can figure it out at that point. And I didn't want to know anything about his shoulder. And so we did the session, and I said to him, now I'm going to call your mom in, and then we can discuss what we were feeling. So the mom comes in and he looks at me and I look at him. And what I was feeling is that he was shot in his shoulder during the Civil War. And I could see him dressed exactly like that as a soldier. And I did not know that that's what he kept on telling his mom, that he was shot in that arm. And but while I was doing the clearing on him, I asked God and his angels to clear that energy from him so that his arm would be able to heal. So she comes in and I looked at him and he wanted to say so bad. And I said to him, on the count of 3, let's both say what we were seeing and feeling at the same time. And I said 1, 2, 3, and he exactly said what I said. I thought was going to pass out because she never believed him that he was an old soul that came back. And from that point on, and she always calls me or texts me. She says, I can't believe he does not have any pain in that arm now.
Yeah.
It was a past life.
Yeah, that's the most logical explanation,
Yeah.
So effectively what you do in your healing work, we would term as psychokinesis, mind affecting matter. So when you heal somebody, your physical brain is still in your head, right? But your energy is extending beyond your body, and it's affecting another person, and so healing work is a perfect example of that power of prayer, things of that nature, and even telepathy. The minds are extending outside their body. You haven't thought about a friend of yours in 30 years. All of a sudden you wake up, you start thinking of that friend, and then you get an email or a phone call from that friend after 30 years on that day. How does that explain? You're communicating, but not by normal means. So energy is something that we continue to explore, but we still don't truly understand it.
No. And when people say, oh, you've healed me. No, I did not heal you. I'm the little plug-in from God and your spirit guides and your angels, your loved ones that actually come down, and they're the ones that are doing the healing through me. It's not me doing the healing. So, and I feel we all have that abilities to be able to help out, even ourselves heal once we tap into that upper realm that's there to help us. I always say, that intuitive feeling that you get, those are messages from them without a doubt. And they're showing us what it is that we need to do or not do. But again, as you mentioned, free will.
Yeah. And a lot of people, when it comes to these, signs and after death communications, what I usually tell people is, like, when they say, well, how do I know if it's real? The simplest answer that I could give is that when it's real, it attached to a knowing. Like when you see it, something inside of you just knows this is your loved one, coming through. You're not questioning it. It's solid. And when you get those, now, not everything is a sign. I think it's a mistake to attribute everything as a communication or a sign. True, it's in reality, it's not. But the really true communications, as I mentioned, are attached to that, where you have no doubt. You just know.
You just know. Yeah, I always tell everyone it's a knowing without knowing.
Right.
And it's I always call them my voiceless voices. Because sometimes there is a voice, sometimes there isn't a voice, but it's just, you just know. It's that knowing.
Yeah.
Now, I know there's so many like psychics and mediums in this world. How do you know if one is real? If you're sitting with a real medium or psychic?
Yeah. It's one of the reasons that I wrote the book, The Medium Explosion, because based upon my work with mediums over the past 18 and 19 years, I've come to the conclusion that 85 to 90% of the mediums that practice today cannot do what they claim.
Oh,
and that doesn't mean that they're fraudulent, although some are. It's mostly people that have some degree of intuitive ability, like we were talking about before, but they haven't honed their abilities or skill to the point where they can truly communicate with the dead. And they combine psychic information, with after-death communication, and they're just, not that evidential. So, what we do when we evaluate, and we have a medium certification program, and we train sitters, people that are getting the readings, how to score information as the medium is giving it to them. And general information is different than specific information, and it has to be scored more heavily. So any medium can look at me and tell me that they have my deceased grandmother here, because if they look at how old I am, they know statistically my grandmother would be 120 or more. So, the chances are, not too many people live that long, but if she said, the medium said, I have your grandmother Rebecca here, and my grandmother's name was Rebecca, that's evidential because, there's an exact name. So that there's, mediums, sometimes they'll do a reading based on body language and assumptions. They size up your age, your ethnicity, where you live, and the way you talk, and they feed you back information. Other times it's really, really specific and evidential, and there's no way that they possibly could have known that, or even, found it on social media, or, when they looked it up. It's very obscure information. And mediumship research has also been taking place for, 100 years. And most of the scientists have come to the conclusion that some people can indeed, communicate with the dead. But I think we live in an unfortunate time now where, there are a lot of shows and TV shows and movies about mediumship, and a lot of mediums have become famous, a lot of them that we've certified over the years. And people say, I want to be like them. Some of them are motivated by money or fame, and they hang out a shingle. There are no governing bodies that regulate these things. Mm-hmm. Anybody can open up a sign, a store, and say, Bob the medium, and start charging people $400 for a reading and come in. There's no ethical guidelines. There's no proficiency guidelines, it's licensing and background or anything like that. And yet what are mediums doing? That they're sitting with people that are in grief, and some of them are just hanging on by a thread. And then if they see a medium that's either fraudulent or inexperienced, they may walk away from that medium reading in worse shape than when they came, because then now they're convinced my loved one doesn't exist. It's all a crock, So we take mediumship very, very seriously. We tell mediums that before you embark on such a career, that really examine your motivation, and it's not an easy job. You're plus a lot of good mediums there, and I would imagine you feel that way too. You're empathic, so you feel the person that you're communicating with, and that can affect you. A lot of mediums have physical ailments, because of it takes a toll.
And that's why I like when I do a session, whether it's a hypnosis or energy healing, I always see myself and the client stepping into a protective light shield, because I do not want to pick up their energy, and I don't want them to pick up my energy. And I've noticed a lot of mediums, the psychics, become very sick, and it's because they do not use energy protection.
Yeah, and it's a good point, because I've asked that question, to mediums over the years. Why is it that negative information never comes through in a reading? I said, how could that be? I mean, assuming that there is, that the universe is made up of positive and negative energy, why does negative energy never come through when you're doing a reading? And the explanation that I get most often is just what you said, that I asked my, spirit or the universe or my guides to surround me, with white light, and that works, because, they just, and I would imagine if negative energy seeps through, they keep it to themselves. You don't necessarily want to communicate that to somebody.
Yeah, because it could be not good at all. Yeah. And I've had it where something actually tried to, psychically attack
Yeah.
And then I start saying my prayers, and without a doubt, I know, trust, and feel that I am protected. And then it can't come at me.
It's an important point because, especially if you don't get mentorship or learn or training, and you're intuitive, all this information coming at you at once, if you can't control it, you can have, develop, mental illness or physical ailments from it. So it's important, we were working with the Yale School of Medicine, and they were doing a study where they were examining mediums and other intuitive ability, that people that heard voices, because they thought that if they could identify how a medium could turn off the voices, they could help some of their mental health patients who were hearing voices, to control it. So that was an interesting study that I'm interested to see what the findings are, but it is important.
Yeah, I sometimes wonder with people that are mentally ill, is it that they see and hear and feel and a different realm, and that's why people think they're crazy, but they're not able to control that whole situation.
Right. Yeah, I think that's true. And I think that there are, look, certain people need medication. They do have mental illness, but other people are misdiagnosed. They're just highly intuitive. And then, but the psychiatrist that they're seeing says, well, this is hallucinations and you have a series and you have to take, and they're on medication needlessly. And that's what I hoped in that study that Yale was doing, is that they'd be able to identify which people didn't need medication. It's normal. They just have to learn how to control it.
Yeah, I feel that way too. Because, here in California, there's a lot of homeless, and in some of the areas that I'll sometimes make a call. I go to a house, a home, and do an energy clearing, and because there's a spirit or something in the house. But I see a lot of them in the streets, and they're chatting and talking and to just nobody. But yet I sense that it's not that they're talking to nobody. They are actually chatting to other spirits. And and it's just a shame that we don't help them.
It's true. And even with our children, children, as they're closer to the veil, so to speak, and they have a lot of intuitive ability. It hasn't been weaned out of them yet by society. And yet when a child starts mentioning to their parent that they see deceased grandma, what does the parent often do? They say, wow, I got to take my child to a psychologist because there's something wrong with him. He's seeing things, instead of talking to your child, embracing it, having a conversation about it, and framing it as something that is more of a blessing than something to be fearful of. And I think if we could do that as a society, we'd raise more better adjusted children.
I think so too. My mom used to always tell me it was my imagination, but because my grandma was a healer, which was her mother, and why she never believed in it, I cannot understand. I knew, because of my grandma telling me it's not your imagination, that I knew I wasn't crazy.
Thank goodness for grandma.
I know, because I don't know where I would be now.
Right.
Probably heavily medicated. So.
And out on the street.
Yeah, exactly. Out on the street is right. But yeah. So do you feel that because a lot of us can, see and speak to people that passed on, that it actually helps those that are grieving?
Well, there have been quite a number now of clinical studies and published in peer-reviewed journals that show that those who believe in life after death do better in the grieving process than those who don't. And that makes sense, because what could give you more hope than believing that your loved one is not dead, but still exists in some form, even though you can't physically touch them, you still can communicate. So I think that a powerful experience, such as a near-death experience, as you've had, or a really powerful medium reading, has the power to flip somebody and really change their perspective. We've been running these grief retreats for many years, and that one of them was featured in that Netflix documentary. But we see people, come in on Friday as they arrive, and they could barely speak, and there's heavy grief, and you just see that they're tormented. And when they leave Sunday night, many are able to smile and laugh and have, like a rejuvenation of spirit. And in many cases, it's long lasting, and that's a wonderful thing, because, so yeah, to answer your question, no matter how you get there, whether it be from a personal experience, or from research, or from medium, it really can do a tremendous amount for someone's grief.
Yeah, I feel that too, because I sometimes, some of my clients come in, and when we do a session, all of a sudden a loved one comes in, and the person's right in front of me, and I can actually see them and describe. And I had a session where the grandma was trying to tell me her name, and I just could not. It was a long Italian name, and I just couldn't understand it for the life of me. And then all of a sudden, I started smelling chocolate chip cookies, and after the session, I said to her, has anyone ever, used to bake chocolate chip cookies? And it was the grandma. And it's amazing that if you're not able to maybe, hear or sometimes see, they'll do something else so that that it's them. And in this case, it was chocolate chip cookies, and I knew no one was baking because we're in the office.
Yeah, sometimes it's amazing how, the information gets manifested. I once was watching a medium do a reading for a woman, and all of a sudden the medium, which kind of amazed me, started doing sign language, as she's speaking, accompanying her words. And what I found out afterwards was that the woman she was reading, and the medium was bringing through the person's deceased daughter. The daughter was deaf,
Wow.
in life. And when I talked to the medium afterwards, the medium said she has absolutely no knowledge of sign language. But kind of spirit took over her body, and she was making all the correct, signs. And so, how do you explain something like that?
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Do you feel sometimes that can get stuck into somebody, like another spirit? I know.
Yeah, well,
yeah.
in mediumship, we're familiar with mental mediumship, this mind-to-mind communication, but more prevalent back in the Victorian era, there were a lot of trance mediumship was taking place, and that the person in spirit would take over the medium's body and speak through the medium's vocal cords, or actually control the medium's body. And sometimes the medium was in an unconscious state and really had no knowledge of it afterwards. So, yeah, I mean, history tells us that, and you don't see a lot of it today, but yeah, the medium can. That explains how even mental mediums, when they're doing readings, sometimes take on that personality, because it sort of moves through them.
Right. Well, yeah. And do you feel that the spirit knows to leave that medium's body?
Yeah, I mean, it's never a situation, or I've read about that they get stuck in there. They just, now a lot of people believe that there are earthbound spirits, the people that have such an attachment to the physical realm that they just want to stay close, and they'll actually, kind of maybe stay in a house, or stay, let's say the person, had a habit or an addiction, and they live vicariously through others. But those are rare occurrences, and for the most part, I think that when we pass, we immediately we have help, but I mean, think about it, especially if you didn't believe in life after death, and now you physically die and you open your eyes and, you're dead, but you're alive, so that must be mind boggling, right? There has to be a period of adjustment. We need help to explain what's going on, so, and that may explain why some people take longer to be able to communicate than others, that you need help. Maybe there are mediums on the other side, like there are here, that help to get the messages across,
Yeah, I feel it's fascinating. And it is a gift, that we allow ourselves to be able to speak with the other side and to feel them. And, I know many a times my grandma, when I was writing my book, actually, there was no doubt in my mind that it was channeled through her, because
Yeah.
I can feel her hugging me and always being there with me as I would close my eyes and just start typing, and I'd say, how did I know this? I never really learned it, but yet I know it.
Yeah. It's a
Yes.
form of automatic writing, where
Mhm.
in a sense, what you were describing, the person in spirit is kind of taking over, there are mediums in history that they would just pick up a pencil, put it on a piece of paper, and then start writing about things they had no knowledge of.
Knowledge of, yeah.
There are mediums in history that did it with both hands. They'd be writing 2 books simultaneously, and I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah.
But we'll look at all the, how many composers and musicians and scientists, and this. I don't know where the idea came from. It just popped into my head, and
Mhm.
it came from somewhere.
Oh, there's no doubt in my mind. It's funny because when I've wanted to do a podcast for a very long time, and I was sitting here and I said, all right, I think I'll call the podcast Motivate Your Life, because that's the name of my website. And then all of a sudden I heard, no. And I said, all right, well, okay, so what should I call it? And I was given the Spiritual Warrior Coach. And I hear them say it a few times to me. And I sat and I chuckled and I said, do you really think that name is going to be available? Because it's so out there, there's so many spiritual warrior. And they actually told me, just look. Went on the internet, and Bob, I swear to you, I got the .com and the .net. It was there.
Yeah.
So it's amazing. They do speak to us. All we need to do is listen.
Yeah. Well, a lot of it, when we grow up, what do we say often? I followed my gut. People say that they have no idea what that really means, but it's really following their intuition, and, I think we should pay attention to it more instead of just dismissing it.
Yeah, there's that. And as you mentioned before, children are very intuitive.
Yeah.
Until the real life happens. And
yes.
Hopefully some stay in that realm.
Yeah.
And then others get away from it. But I feel like with my daughter, for instance, she's in her 40s, and now she's all of a sudden getting into the spiritual of life. And I think in their 40s, some people actually now, for whatever reason, embrace it.
Yeah. Never too late.
No.
Takes some of us longer to realize it.
I know. So this is, got to have you on again and talk about your, I did receive your book. Oh, it's in my bedroom. I was reading it.
Okay.
Thank you. I did receive your book. I hope you received mine also.
I didn't get it yet, but I have to check the box, make sure.
Oh, yeah, because it was delivered, I think it said Friday.
Okay,
so,
it's probably there. I'll pick it up tomorrow.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But so where can my listeners get a hold of you? And, do you do workshops?
Well, yeah, I mean, with the foundation does, the website for the foundation is foreverfamilyfoundation.org. And all of our information on our retreats and webinars and things, radio show is on the website. I write a personal blog, as you mentioned in the introduction, beyondthefivesenses.com, which is when thoughts pop into my head, that's where they go. And the book is called The Medium Explosion. if anybody wants to email me personally, and my email address is robert@foreverfamilyfoundation.org.
Well, I thank you so much. I'm so
Thank
happy.
you.
I'm so happy I found you.
I enjoyed
Actually, you're the first man on my podcast show.
Really? What an honor.
So it's funny. I got an email when was about a month ago saying, "Gee, you have all women. What about the men?"
Yeah,
And
you
I
got to
said,
get up to speed, Barbara. You know?
I said, "Well, I have to find the right man, and then he'll come on my show." And here you are. Well, thank you again. So one more time, your website?
Foreverfamilyfoundation.org.
Well, thank you so much, Bob. And, thank you all for listening. And a big thank you to my very special guest, Bob Ginsberg. And I hope that you heard what you needed to hear. So please visit me at motivateyourlife.net and also subscribe to this YouTube channel, the Spiritual Warrior Coach Podcast. We're on Spotify, Amazon, iTunes, Apple, Chrome, and many other avenues. And I also have another YouTube channel, just Barbara Savin, and there I have meditations for sleep and grounding and some other things that I hope you enjoy. And for those of you may be interested in learning energy healing, check out my book, Gentle Energy Touch. Actually, here we go. Gentle Energy Touch, the beginner's guide to hands-on healing. So again, thank you to my wonderful guest, Bob, for all this knowledge. And have a beautiful week, everyone, filled with love and with light. Love, Barbara.